There's a very liberal government there, has been for many years.
Right.
And Paris is known for liberalism. But these things are going against their reality check. It's going to take them a while to wake up to, just like Hitler. Europe was liberal, the governments, and they allowed and permitted Hitler to go against the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was not allowed to build up a military, and they permitted it and they allowed it.
Oh, you
And
mean
then-
after World War I they were not allowed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they gave him Czechoslovakia and so on. And what that does with a mentality like a totalitarian government, they take that as a sign of weakness and they want more. The more they get, the more they want. So they say, well, if they gave into this, they're going to give into that. And so liberalism doesn't work in the real world, only in fantasy, you know, because human nature is not that way. So you can't treat them liberally. Otherwise, they will destroy you. I mean, that's just what's happening, you know, and they have to come to grips with it, of course. But we have to pray for this worldwide terrorism issue. Paul says in the last days, the English Bible says perilous times will come. In Greek, it means dangerous times will come in the last days. And people can be at a concert, people can be somewhere, and because of the invention of the automatic weapon, people can just start suddenly dying because of this type of weapon. And so Paul says in the last days, there would be dangerous times. And he delineates the type of characteristics that will be prominent in people in the last days. But those will be extenuated, enhanced during the tribulation period. All of the negative characteristics that he lists in mankind in the last days are going to be 100-fold worse during the tribulation, 7-year tribulation. But he did say dangerous times would come. So that's why it's important to pray that you're always at the right place at the right time. I tell people a wonderful affirmation to say is, I'm always, Lord, at the right place at the right time. And it's very, very important. Jesus was always at the right place at the right time. And he was always able to escape danger. So you have to pray, and you can't think like the mass mind. The world doesn't think. The world follows, and we must not be part of that world system. We're in the world, but we're not of it. There's a difference. It doesn't mean we separate ourselves physically from the world. No, that's not what the Bible teaches either. Jesus was always in and amongst the people, but he was separate unto God. That's where the separation came from. It says he was holy, without sin, undefiled, and separate unto God. But we know physically he was with them, just like Moses was with the people, although he was separated unto God. Sanctified is the English word, which sounds very holy and righteous, but it just means to be separate. Once again, when we have blanket statements, general statements, we have to always define them when it comes to further analysis of whatever it is we're talking about. We can be liberal when it comes to giving. We can be liberal when it comes to sharing and that sort of thing. But when it comes to evil of any kind and any manifestation of evil, then we have to be conservative. We have to be staunch. We have to be firm in that area. Political liberalism is artificial. The Bible says in the Old Testament, the liberal shall stand in his way. In other words, the liberal will take what comes from his liberal or her liberal policies. And you can't be weak in the world. You cannot be. You have to have a military, for example. You have to have a police force. Yet, the liberal doesn't like the police. The liberal doesn't like the military. And once again, it's not based on reality. It's based on fantasy of how they wish the world was, but it is not. Okay, so people always need a reality check. There are blacks and whites out there. There is evil and there is good. And we must be balanced. Now, in helping another nation, we can be liberal, of course, have a liberal policy, let's say, and that sort of thing. But when it comes to enemies, we have to use the Old Testament as our examples. That Israel had to be strong against her enemies. All right. It's not something that people really want. I think even people that are militaristic, technically they really don't want to be that way, but they are realists, and they feel they have to be that way. So, you know, the liberal governments of Europe, they always let everything just build up, build up, build up, build up, and then we have to come in historically. And if you don't believe me, I taught world history. You will always see us having to step in. We had to go into World War II because of Europe's policies. We had to send our people there. The same thing for World War II, the same thing in Korea, the same thing in Vietnam, you see. And because people are weak, they let things go and they expect somebody else to bail them out. And that's the wrong policy for them. And as a result, we've had to do it. And yet, we're probably the most hated country on the face of the planet. You know, they find something wrong, and so they focused on that. But overall, America should never be ashamed of her record of giving. We've given literally trillions of dollars over the years. We're only, 200 and something years old. That's incredible feat. No one's ever done that before in the history of the world. I can guarantee you. Study world history. Study U.S. history. Okay, we're going to be looking at Mark, of course, and I want to digress a little bit in a moment. Okay, so let's go to John chapter 1. Our dear brother Simon Brown in the UK has a website, and at least one of the sections or videos on the website is being attacked. And they're claiming that he's wrong in stating that Jesus said that he is the I am, or that he is God. They're claiming that Jesus never claimed to be God. They are even trying to use Greek. They are not Greek scholars, which is readily apparent. I'm going to go to their website. It's run by Muslims. And they're trying to say that the New Testament is incomplete, some of it's mistranslated, and so on and so forth. And they're the ones with the problem, and they're telling the Christians they have the problem. That's really not true. So these are our scriptures. We understand them a lot better than they do. And I'm sure they would say the same about their scriptures, which we do not accept at all. Okay? That are plain Greek scholar. They're trying to act as though they know Greek, and they'll take an interlinear and they'll show a few words and they'll try to change it around to make it look as though the Christian historic position is incorrect. And they're trying to tell Simon that he is incorrect in his website. And so I always consult with Simon if he asks me. I put myself in the place of a servant for him. He deserves it. We should show nothing but respect for him due to the great discovery that he made concerning the great stone. That was an absolute spectacular discovery, probably one of the greatest in the history of archaeology, and I think someday he will be credited with that. And as any pioneer, it takes time for their work to be recognized, and especially those outside of the profession. And many times they have to fight long and hard historically to get their discovery over to the intelligentsia, to the scholars, and to the world. All right, John chapter 1, verse 1. Jesus is God. The Bible's very clear about this. In the beginning, he's referring to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, was the Word, the Logos, the expression of God. Okay? And the Word was with God. Now, the word with is pros in the Greek, P-R-O-S. And as it's translated here, it means to face. And it means to face with equal authority and power and being. That is that the Word is co-equal with God, Theos here, the Godhead, and he is facing God directly. Perfect equality, that means. Okay? And was facing God, and the Word was himself Theos. So it tells us that the Logos is God. Now, How do we identify the Logos as Jesus? Very simple. Verse 14. And the Word became flesh. He is clearly and unequivocally talking about Jesus Christ. Became flesh. Now, since the Word became flesh, it means that the Word remained God and the Word became flesh. So we have the God-man. But we're told in other places in the Bible that he laid aside his heavenly privileges and prerogatives, and that he became deliberately a servant for us. Okay? And we have to keep that in mind. At times, he was at liberty to demonstrate that he did have the same power and authority, even though he was in the flesh. He stilled the storm immediately. He walked on water. His whole being became effulgent. His face shone like the sun on the Mount of Transfiguration. And so, overall, he laid aside all of this. He had to eat, he got tired, he slept, and so forth. He even wept. Okay? And the Word became flesh and dwelt, or tented down, tabernacled amongst us. And we beheld his glory. Now the Bible is very clear in the Old Testament. God says, I will not share my glory with another. Nobody else has my doxa, in the Greek it says. Nobody else has my glory. All right? And John says, he was an eyewitness, beheld his glory. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. All right? Only God is truth. Only God is grace. And John is saying that the Logos became flesh. Yes, he became a human being. And this is where rightly dividing the word comes in. You see Jesus eating. God does not have to eat. All right? So you have to remember that in the flesh, Jesus did certain things. But as God, the hypostatic union, he was still God. He could, when he wished, demonstrate that he still had all of his powers, even though he became a man. All right? But he laid that dignity that he had before aside and made himself subject to our evil world. And in my view, was disgracefully treated when he was here. Okay? At least for sure during the 3 years of his ministry, to the point where they crucified him. Okay? So, does anybody have any questions on this? This is the key verse. John is setting the theme and the tone for his book that Jesus is God, but that Jesus is also flesh. Now, the Gnostics were false advocates of Christ during the first century, and John really took a lead in thundering against their false doctrines. They believed that Jesus was just like spirit, and they thought anything fleshly or materialistic was evil. Okay? And so John is saying, no, he was flesh. He became flesh. Sarkis here in the Greek, and it means flesh. Okay? Human flesh.
The word pros, what is the word that you say was in Greek pros?
Verse 1, was.
Was. Okay,
Translated
thank you.
was. Yeah, see, in English you miss so much. And that's where these false teachers take advantage. And then they'll throw in a few Greek words. They don't understand Greek. They've never been trained in Greek. It takes many, 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 many years to learn Greek. The way you need to know it. Okay, the same for Hebrew. And it takes a lot of thought going on. And you have to have a lot of reference books to look up one word. I'm not talking about even the grammar here. The contextual setting. Then you have to look up other Greek words. So when I answer a question from somebody like Simon, I put a lot of work into it. I have to condense it because I don't have much time. So I have to know where to go and so on. These guys are amateurs. And they are the ones telling the world that Jesus is not God. And the Bible itself teaches that, they're saying. And it's absolutely not true. Okay? And the Bible warned about these kinds of teachers that would come in the last days and teach those kinds of things. Okay, so everybody has John 1:1 down and 1:14?